Hello, my name is Brian Michael Leone. I'm the International Cultural Heritage Protection Program Manager at the Smithsonian's Museum Conservation Institute, a research unit of the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. This video is part of our series on the fundamentals of heritage conservation, sponsored by the Getty Foundation. There are links to additional videos below, available in English, Arabic, and Kurdish. I specialize in managing heritage projects. That means that I work with interdisciplinary teams to identify and solve complex challenges facing all types of heritage. I have over 25 years of experience in the field across the US and throughout the Middle East. In 2009, I was the first director of the Iraqi Institute for the Conservation of Antiquities and Heritage in Erbil, Iraq, and since 2017, I've worked for the Smithsonian. Today, I'm going to give you a very broad overview of what we in the US call historic preservation and is known as architectural conservation internationally. My talk is divided into three parts. First, I'll explain what it means when we say a place is significant as architectural heritage. I'll provide some internationally standard definitions and speak about heritage values. Second, I'll mention how internationally accepted policies and standard practices are used to define, identify, and manage architectural heritage. And third, I will talk about making plans to ensure architectural heritage is proactively maintained and preserved for the benefit of future generations. A word about additional resources. This video is intended to be a brief introduction to this field, not an exhaustive course. I've included some links to related content in the description below this video. And again, be sure to watch the other videos in this series. First, let's define architectural heritage. In the series introduction video, my colleague Jessica Johnson and I talked about the types of heritage. Be sure to watch that video for more information. Architectural heritage, generally, is grouped into buildings, monuments, and sites, and is only considered tangible, immovable heritage. Shown here are some internationally famous examples of heritage buildings, monuments, and sites in India, the Netherlands, China, and Mexico. Now, I'll note here that one should not confuse an architectural site with an archaeological site. In their purest forms, architectural sites have standing buildings and structures, while archaeological sites are subsurface, meaning that they are still below ground. And while many sites have elements of both architecture and archaeology, the approaches to preserving and conserving them can widely differ. In this discussion, we're going to focus just on those standing elements above ground. Of course, not all buildings and structures need to be preserved. There's a process to determine which heritage is significant and worthy of preservation for future generations. Typically, this process involves understanding the significance of a place, which can be understood as a combination of several factors. The first is a sense of value. Why is a place important to one or more groups? For example, Iraq's first World Heritage listed site, Hatra, shown here, is valued in many ways. It retains many intact structures from the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD and has high scientific value for what it can tell us about construction materials and techniques of the past. Many statues and reliefs have been recovered from Hatra and have a high artistic value, and many of these art pieces convey the religious value of the place in history. The compilation of these values, combined with an understanding of authenticity, or how much original material remains, and integrity, or how intact is that original material, determines the significance of a place. A highly intact original building that is valued for many reasons has a higher level of significance than one that does not. This process to determine significance can vary in application depending on the country and location in which one is working. However, the overarching approach globally can generally be traced back to the Venice Charter of 1964, so named for the location of a conference when international experts came together to define and set internationally accepted standards of practice for conservation and restoration of monuments and sites. Based on the Venice Charter, conservation should be scientific in nature, do the least amount of harm to historic fabric as possible, and should consider the scale, setting, and context of a place in determining management and treatment options. Several international treaties and conventions use the Venice Charter as a guide. Perhaps most influential is the 1972 World Heritage Convention, which is useful in defining plans to identify, evaluate, and treat architectural heritage. It includes several very specific definitions of conservation and preservation, as well as a comprehensive discussion of outstanding universal value. This means that only those places that have value to all nations should be worthy of inscription in the World Heritage List, which is maintained by UNESCO. From these documents and others, we can generally understand that preservation is understood as a series of actions to maintain the existing status or condition of a heritage site. while conservation can generally be understood as the measures taken to extend the life of heritage while strengthening the ability to share its significant messages and values. With an understanding of what constitutes heritage worthy of preservation, we must first identify those character-defining elements that help to determine the significance of a building, monument, or site. Then we must plan to preserve, or maintain, or conserve, repair, or restore those features. But before we talk about documentation, we should speak about the interdisciplinary nature of architectural conservation. Experts of many disciplines and backgrounds are needed to help save tangible pieces of the past for the future. For example, experts in architectural and urban history can work to fully understand the history and significance of a place, while conservators, architects, and engineers are needed to do the physical protection and interventions needed to keep those places intact for future generations. These specialists and others are all needed on a team to successfully define and implement a plan to conserve a place. Documentation, meaning careful scientific photographs, measured drawings, and narrative information, is at the heart of any architectural conservation plan. Documentation should be thorough enough to understand all the building materials and systems that make up a place, while also capturing information about the setting and historic context of that place. Shown here is a sample of documentation of the Erbil Citadel, a World Heritage listed site. The elements that help drive the outstanding universal value of this place include the intact multi-layered archaeological mound upon which the Ottoman buildings sit, the Ottoman buildings themselves, and the overall plan of the place, which illustrate historic urban functions, such as small alleys connecting residential areas, boulevards connecting commerce and government, and prominent locations of religious structures. Babylon is an example of another World Heritage listed site in Iraq. Much of its outstanding universal value comes from its ability to represent the tangible remains of a historic place, as well as, according to UNESCO, being a 2,000-year-old multifaceted myth that has functioned as a model, parable, and scapegoat. Babylon represents a site that includes original intact ancient fabric, reconstructed buildings, and large unexcavated archaeological deposits. To protect a place like this, a plan is needed to identify issues, threats, and opportunities, as well as to prioritize work to be done over time. In 2015, Iraq completed the Babylon Site Management Plan in collaboration with the World Monuments Fund and as funded by the United States government. The plan is a values-based organizational framework to guide the administration of the site and includes 8 guiding principles, shown here on a page from the document, for stakeholders, including government officials and politicians, all the way to scientific heritage experts, and many in between. The plan calls for management policies while defining priorities for site assessment, preservation, and conservation. It additionally places emphasis on identifying other stakeholders and developing partnerships to ensure long-term success. Shown here are images from the Ahwar, or marshes, of southern Iraq, which is Iraq's newest World Heritage listed site. Implementing a management plan, such as the one for the Ahwar, will involve dozens of individuals working in collaboration. Heritage experts need to continuously document and design preventative approaches to preserving ancient fabric. Government heritage officials will need to oversee this work and ensure it is done to an international standard. Politicians at all levels will need to ensure that policies are put in place to protect the site and implement the provisions of the plan. Others, such as tourism authorities, private hospitality companies, economic development officials and experts, and even the public, will all need to have a say in the sustainable management and use of this historically significant place. The perpetual care of any site involves frequent monitoring by experts and stakeholders of the tangible condition of the site, as well as of the less tangible aspects, such as policies and procedures. This is Samarra, another World Heritage site in Iraq, and shown here are examples of a few documents used to guide the management of the site. Here we have the original site plan that accompanied its nomination to the World Heritage List, a condition assessment by international experts, and a detailed report on the state of conservation of the site as submitted by the Republic of Iraq to UNESCO. This sequence illustrates how a conservation plan can allow for updates that best fit changing needs over time. Particularly where a plan is unsuccessful in protecting a place, it should be evaluated, root causes of failure determined, and either overhauled or replaced. One final note on architectural conservation plans is the need to commit to the long term. Regardless of the discipline or background of the individuals and organizations involved, all must be committed to the perpetual care of the heritage site. This can be challenging in any place that is subject to budget constraints, changing political priorities, and increasing external demands for development and change. On top of these challenges, the threat of climate change is a very real and pressing concern for many heritage places. These are challenges not unique only to Iraq, but to most heritage sites around the world. And in places like Iraq, recent states of conflict have exacerbated these challenges and made it difficult to proactively monitor and manage heritage sites, including World Heritage Sites. Thank you for joining me today in this short overview of architectural conservation and site management. I hope that this broad survey provides enough information for you to continue your research and learning about the field. Be sure to check out the other videos in this series for general information about heritage management and specific information about archaeological site preservation and disaster preparedness and response. Thank you again for your time and for joining me today.